This is Risky Women Radio, a show to connect, celebrate and champion women in risk, regulation and compliance, sharing insight and perspective from the most influential members of our global Risky Women network on the latest developments we need to think about, the challenges we should all talk more about, and the innovation we are most excited about in governance, risk and compliance. Bringing together the hundreds of senior women professionals already connected with a new emerging group of leading women and men. I'm Kimberly Cole, your Chief Risky Woman. Welcome to Risky Women Radio. Today's Risky Women are Benedicte Nolens and Meena Datwani. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
So Benedicte and Meena were both present at our inaugural Risky Women event that we held in Hong Kong way back in 2014 and have both spoken at our Risky Women breakfast events, which was fantastic when we did a breakfast with the regulators. So let's see where the conversation takes us today. I imagine we're going to hear financial crime, AML, fintech, RegTech, and hopefully we can get into a bit of diversity and inclusion as well. So very briefly, let me introduce our two Risky Women. Benedicte is an accomplished senior executive in the financial industry with 20 years of global experience and is currently the head of Global Regulatory Affairs Asia and Europe for Circle. She's an in-depth experience in implementing risk governance frameworks, leveraging data analytics, and she's also known for her leadership in fintech and RegTech, having produced several reports for IOSCO and the industry. She has law and MBA degrees, and I'm going to leave her to share even more of her accomplishments and the journey that she has been on. Meena was formerly Executive Director at the HKMA. Meena was responsible for overseeing the enforcement function of the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, including handling of complaints against authorised institutions, as well as the supervision of the anti-money laundering and financial crime management. She also sat on the board of directors of the Financial Dispute Resolution Centre. She worked in the Office of the General Counsel as Deputy General Counsel before her appointment as Executive Director Banking Conduct in 2010 and Director General Enforcement in 2014. Meena is qualified to practice as a solicitor in Hong Kong, England and Wales, and the Australian Capital Territory. And she is now on the board of Pathfinders, which I look forward to hearing more about as well. So let's kick off, Benedicte, with you telling us a bit more colour around your career journey.
So thank you, Kim, for that introduction. So my career journey really began, let's say, before I started my career studying in Belgium. I'm originally from Belgium. From there, I had decided I wanted to really start in America. So I went to the University of Chicago and after that started a job in New York. And then through real coincidences, I ended up in Hong Kong in 1997. And just for your memory, that is the year of both, number one, the handover of Hong Kong, and secondly, as well, the start of the Asian financial crisis. So that was the start of my career. I started with Goldman, stayed there for 10 years. After that, I went to Credit Suisse for 5 years. And then I got proposed to go to the SFC and had a totally new operation called Risk and Strategy Unit, which I obviously accepted. I stayed with the SFC for 6 years. And recently I made a totally different move into the fintech sector and in fact into the crypto sector. So, and I'm now with Circle, which is one of the two leading US players in this very new space.
Fantastic. Lots I think we can get into and talk about there. But Meena, let's hear a little bit more about your journey.
Thanks, Kimberly, for inviting me to this Risky Radio, Women Radio. I can say that I've had a very interesting career, although slightly different from Benedicte, because it was exclusively in the public sector. I majored in business administration, economics, and political science at Hong Kong U, and then joined government as an executive officer. And after working there for 3 years, I got a government legal training scholarship and went to England to read law. And then to get that scholarship, I had to be bonded for the government, to work for the government for 5 years. But actually, I ended up working for government for 10 years in the Attorney General's chambers and did a lot of very interesting work, including going to the Privy Council. But mainly I specialized in judicial reviews. And because I did, I suppose, okay, they sort of picked me for rapid promotion and grooming. It was prior to the handover and they wanted to localize. But I felt that I really don't want to do criminal prosecution and the like for 2 years. So I decided to apply to the Monetary Authority. And I was fortunate to be accepted, and I joined as a senior counsel, not meaning a silk, just, senior manager level.
Right.
Yeah. And have been there since last year when I actually retired. But while I was in the legal office of the MA, I specialized in banking advisory and litigation work. And my break came after Lehman Brothers, when there was, like 20,000 complaints and the MA was completely, inundated with complaints. And LegCo formed a subcommittee. And I was asked to be part of the team that prepped Joseph and our Deputy Chief Executive, YK Choi, for the subcommittee proceedings. And I ended up going to LegCo with them for like 13 times. It was quite an experience. I think because of this, I was given the rare opportunity to move to policy work. First as a head of the Banking Conduct Department, where I stayed for 5 years, and also an amazing journey that I had there. But my last post was the ED enforcement of AML supervision. And again, a very interesting experience there for about 3 years. I'm proud to say that I was the first female ED to retire at the age of 60. And I think my guiding principle, because I know that this is all part of, trying to mentor, the younger generation. I think what I've, if you think it's a success, my successful career has been in a large part due to the attitude that, work is service. Work done in the spirit of service is worship. So that's the attitude I have. And I always volunteered to do more than I was asked to do.
Excellent. And I mean, you've already mentioned some of the projects that, you were lucky enough to work on. And I know, Benedicte, you've also done some amazing projects, especially work with IOSCO and stuff. Can you share more about, some of the more interesting projects that you've been involved in?
Well, I have to say I can't complain about any specific part of my career, because in every part I've been involved in a lot of interesting work. Maybe to take through the different pieces, in Goldman, it was the very early years of Asia, so that's about 21 years ago. We were actually a fairly small office, and even for the region, we had only a bit over a handful of compliance officers. So you ended up doing everything, including what I call offense and defense. So offense is building out offices, are acquiring new companies into the company. For example, we acquired a footprint in Australia, actually, where you come from, as well as in India, and that was greatly exciting. We set up offices in Korea, in China, etc. So building these businesses was a lot of fun. And then there was the defense part. The defense is when we got inquiries into different businesses. And that happened across the region, and I've been doing a lot of work in that, and I enjoy both the building as well as the defense side. In Credit Suisse, I would say the highlight of my 5 years there was to have a really large team, 150 people. It's a great management platform. I enjoy management, so for me, it's not a stretch. I enjoy it when people have problems and you can help them solve. I also enjoy having happy people below me, so I very much emphasize protecting them when they actually need the protection from the umbrella above them, which I do consider that management is a role that it plays. And then, as you say, in the SFC, there, I would say the real exciting part, you just touched upon it, for sure, was all the international work, the IOSCO work, the work with the FSB, working with BIS, working with also many industry participants in these contexts and trying to bridge between what the industry needs or thinks or can achieve and what the regulator wants or expects or wants to change. So greatly exciting on all fronts. And now I'm in the crypto space, and I would say I'm now dealing with all of these aspects into one very early stage industry. So very much the early building stage. We're actually even putting the policy foundations now in place. So I'm let's say relying on my experience of let's say the Goldman job, the CS job, also the public policy job at the SFC. So
interesting, yeah. So how all of these things come together. So yeah, I'm sure we can get into a bit more about that. And what do you think was the biggest risk that you've taken in your career?
I think the two biggest risks was first to come to Hong Kong, and specifically at that time with as said, both the handover at the time, people were greatly concerned. And in fact, the reality is a lot of people went the other way and I was coming this way, and I probably had the opportunity to come this way because a lot were moving the other way. So my bet was that Hong Kong would stay Hong Kong and Hong Kong would stay successful and extraordinary. And over 21 years, that's certainly been true. So that's been paying off for 21 years, that decision. And by the way, the choice was in my case to stay in New York or to go back to Belgium. So these were the choices. And in that sense, I just literally moved to the other side of Earth. So I can definitely tell you my parents were not happy at the time because they very much expected me to return to my homeland and to stay in Europe from there on and not to go to the other side of Earth. I'd already gone to one side, which was US, and then I flipped over to the other side. So at least they were confused. The second, you could say, risk is to now join a very, very new sector that is still at very much inception phases.
Yes, and we'll get into a bit more about that. And what about for you, Meena? What do you think are some of the risks that you've taken along your journey?
I think the fact that I moved from the legal office to policy work was a big risk that I'd taken because, frankly, I hadn't done direct policy work. And also I was moving into a new area for the MA post Lehman Brothers collapse. And actually, I'd never had any management experience because in the legal office, I just had my secretary that I had to supervise. And suddenly I went from one person to 100 people. And what's more, that the external environment, somehow everything that could go wrong went wrong that first year. And it was really, really tough. Because what happened was, there was like 6 yoga centers that went bust. And I had all of these yoga fanatics coming and complaining, LegCo members. And it was just,
things that you couldn't anticipate.
Exactly. And then, there was, of course, the aftermath of the LegCo SC inquiry. And we had to implement all the 19 recommendations in a report that we did to the FS. And then there was I don't know if you remember, you would both have been in Hong Kong, the Octopus card saga, where Octopus, without the consumer knowing, were selling their personal data onto third parties. Yeah. And that caused a big outroar and the CEO had to resign. So all of this was happening, but it was sort of like, it was really... I find that I thrive when I work under pressure, and it made me more resilient. But that was actually a big risk that I took, making that at quite an advanced age.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, you've both been regulators. Can you tell us more with that sort of vantage of being a regulator or having been a regulator? The role itself, how is the role evolving and changing given the disruption in the market and some of the new, things like crypto coming out, for example, and both that kind of, I guess, thought as well as what you think is going to be the evolution for the sort of regulators of the future.
So maybe I'll let Meena speak first because she was a regulator for much longer than I was a regulator for 6. But how many years were you, Meena?
23 years.
23 years. So I think let's first benefit from the 23 years experience.
Okay, so I do agree that the role is evolving. You take, for example, banking conduct. in the aftermath of the global financial crisis, the public expected the MA to look after their interests, the consumers, they expected that. So the MA, which previously was more focused on prudential supervision, had to pump in resources to banking regulation. And so the Banking Conduct Department was established, and we churned out a lot of regulation to protect different types of consumers, including vulnerable consumers. We asked banks to have red and black zone. We introduced audio recording, investor education initiatives, so that the consumers themselves would become smart and responsible. However, 10 years after the event, the pendulum is shifting a bit. And now the MA is more focused on taking a balanced and responsive approach to supervision. Last year, the MA appointed a task force comprising industry representatives to seek the view of industry on HKMA supervisory initiatives to ensure proper outcomes in a fast evolving landscape. Also in the area of combating financial crime, what's evolved is that there's private and public sector cooperation, intelligence sharing. There's a FIMLIT that's been appointed. And this is very exciting because criminals are becoming more and more sophisticated. And really the regulators and all the enforcement agencies, as well as the banks, have to evolve with that and keep up with criminals. So I think the sharing of intelligence is the first step. Also the MA, because over the years there have been so many supervisory manuals and regulations and whatnot, is now revamping all of them, having a look at all of them and seeing how they can consolidate it, and some of the defunct ones can be sort of like discarded. And I was actually at the PWMA Summit a few days ago, and Arthur Yoon, the Deputy Chief Executive of Banking, said that that there will be greater use of RegTech and FinTech. RegTech for the supervisor and FinTech for the industry. When I was in the MA, I was sort of responsible for AML supervision, but my division had already started using a firm to use big data analytics for sanction screening, control systems of the banks in this area, sanction screening. So I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's your thinking on the topic, Benedicte?
So actually, there to connect to what you mentioned, I did actually, you're right, in 2015 and 2016, I think, or was it? Maybe it was a bit later, a year later, I think. We actually did international research on the topic of fintech, and we published that in an IOSCO fintech report. And the report is available online, so anyone can read it in detail. It was an early stage view as to where fintech was going. But the key underlying challenge is the following. So de facto, what fintech is the combination of finance and technology. And de facto, the only reason really these new sectors can thrive and grow fast is because of the internet, number one. And number two, to be frank, thanks to these mobile phones that we all have, these iPhones and smartphones that we all carry everywhere and that we're busy with every day, and that have de facto changed us so much that that's exactly what we want. We only want to interact with that smartphone. So unlike 10 years ago, when finance meant you go to your bank branch or you go to your broker or you go to your wealth manager and you physically talk with them as we're talking with you today, that's not what's happening anymore. People want to be on their iPhone and they want to place their order, whether it is for securities, whether it is for a wealth product, whether it is for a fund, and even whether it is for cryptocurrency, so to say. And that creates huge challenges because the internet is global. And what that means is to take a jurisdictional approach becomes very, very hard. You can be jurisdictional as long as people have to go to a location in that jurisdiction. But when people can cross jurisdictions by putting their orders on an online platform that is elsewhere in the world, you're in a totally different scenario. So I think the greatest challenge for the regulator looking ahead is international enforcement. And to be frank, that will apply to any of the things that you've mentioned, whether it is the plain investor protection angle, the suitability angle, or the fraud angle, but also, of course, in the AML world, right? So that, if anything, will need to evolve much further than it is already. Now, at the SFC, being, let's say, Hong Kong being a hub market, an IFC, as they call it, an international financial center, but a small market if you look by population of people, right? The SFC in Hong Kong has a very externally focused view. And secondly, there is already a lot of international enforcement collaboration, specifically with China. So I think that Hong Kong can probably handle that challenge. But as said, that challenge is only going to grow, and it's going to go global as opposed to staying small in scope.
Yeah, so we're already kind of getting into our expert opinion area here, which is fantastic. So just to take a step back, Meena, can you give us an outline more of the Hong Kong Monetary Authority's overall responsibilities, just for our listeners?
Okay. Well, the HKMA has a very broad mandate, from reserves management to maintaining monetary stability to maintaining Hong Kong's status as an international financial center, and maintaining the stability and effective working of the banking system. And that's just a few, it's really, really broad. Because I really worked on the banking side, so I'll maybe delve a little bit more into the banking side area and what the focus is there. As I mentioned earlier, Arthur was recently at this summit, and he mentioned 3 broad areas of focus of the MA. One was RegTech and FinTech. And actually, I don't know if you've been following the news, but last September, the MA himself announced 7 initiatives for smart banking. And one of these was faster payment systems, which has just been rolled out. And this is a Hong Kong dollar and renminbi platform that would enable the public to make round-the-clock fund transfers in real time using mobile phone numbers or email addresses. And also banks and non-banks providers can participate in this. And then the other initiative under the smart banking was Open API, where people be able to access the data of banks. And then there's research and talent development. And the MA has been working with ASTRI to do research on things like blockchain and other things. And then also one of these was cross-border collaboration and the FinTech Supervisory Box. I mean, that the MA had introduced a few years ago, but this time it was with all the supervisors taking part in this common sandbox, which is very exciting. So the SFC, the IA, the MA. And then virtual banking. That has caused a lot of buzz, and there've already been lots of inquiries. And then the thing that I think will benefit a lot of people is banking made easy. A task force was established to work on remote onboarding and account maintenance, online finance, online wealth management. The other area that Arthur mentioned was cybersecurity. The HKMA is stepping up supervision of technology risks in response to growing cyber threats and the continued adoption of new technology by banks. And then last but not least, it's culture. The financial crisis demonstrated that regulation is not sufficient. Really, to have lasting change, you need to have a cultural change. And so the HKMA has been focusing on capacity building in the banking sector. In fact, I was in the MA when my department introduced this face-to-face meeting, because previously, the MA just approved directors or senior management on the basis of paper vetting. But then we introduced these face-to-face meetings, and it was really, really insightful, because at the very least, people really made an effort to prepare themselves and trying to understand their jobs. So they came before us, and I personally interviewed about 40 odd candidates, and some of them were just not up to the speed, and they had to go back and reapply. But the word got around, and people took it very seriously. But also the MA has had particularly focused on INED, increasing their capacity, having annual conferences. So the first one was last year, and I participated in that. And Andrew Bailey of the FCA was the keynote speaker. And the theme was cultivating culture in the banking industry. And believe it or not, over 100 INEDs attended. I guess Norman said that if you don't attend, you have to have a good reason. So I think 80% of everybody showed up, which was amazing. Andrew Bailey was so impressed. And then the second conference was just held a couple of weeks ago with Julie Dixon giving the keynote address on implementation of sustainable culture. So, and also Norman takes a group of INEDs every year to China so that they can meet the regulators and the INEDs have a very important role. They're a real check and balance. So it's really good to empower them. And then now there's a minimum remuneration for them, because some of them were paid pittance. So now the circular's out. It's been out for a year or so to say that they have to have a minimum pay. Actually, last year, MA initiated a bank culture reform to promote sound corporate culture that supports prudent risk management and contributes towards incentivizing proper staff behavior. So, the banks have been, there were three pillars. One is governance, one is incentive systems, and the other pillar was assessment and feedback mechanism. So the banks have been, given certain tasks that they have to do, including appointing a board level committee to on these things and to report back. So it's all very good, and I think that we're already seeing a more prudent conduct.
Yeah, and I mean, culture continues to be a theme that we hear on many of these sessions, and it's just incredibly important. So maybe a bit of a change in tack, but Benedicte, can you sort of share the role of the Securities and Futures Commission of Hong Kong as well, sort of in that broad brush? What was its remit? And then maybe we'll get into sort of specifically around what you were looking at from the FinTech and RegTech perspective, and the work at IOSCO that you've already shared a bit of.
Okay, so I'm not going to make it too long, because if I make it too long, I'd need to recite the whole SFO, which is the Securities and Futures Ordinance. So, in fact, the key point is that the SFC administers rules and regulations that are contained in the Securities and Futures Ordinance, and it may issue new guidance, guidelines, consultation papers, etc., etc. So the SFC is actually quite neatly set up in its different divisions to ensure it is executing on its duties to administer the implementation of the Securities and Futures Ordinance. And it broadly functions with the following divisions: enforcement, supervision of markets, which really is in charge of supervising the stock exchange of Hong Kong. And then aside from it, there is a corporate finance division that is focused on the listing processes. And then on top of that, there is an investment product division that is focused on de facto investment products, including funds and ETFs, etc. And overlaying it is really the administrative functions, including the CEO office and a number of other functions within the SFC. Correct. So that's how it's organized. So for anyone who wants to better understand the SFC, the best is actually to look at the SFO and then to realize which specific sections of the SFO are administered by which division of the SFC.
Fantastic. So now let's get into FinTech, and maybe if you can talk about, obviously, your views on digitization and technology risks, and what's the sort of challenging areas around that, and tell us about your new role at Circle.
Okay, so Circle, as mentioned, jointly with, I would say, Coinbase, is one of the leading US/global players in this whole new space of blockchain and crypto. Of course, as I mentioned before, this is a very early stage industry, but that is exactly what makes it so attractive, is because it is very much a building role for everybody within this industry. So from my perspective, since I'm the head of regulatory affairs for Asia and Europe, what I need to do is having a lot of conversations really with regulators globally to try and lay the public policy foundations for this industry. Now, what is so, let's say, different about this industry is de facto the technology, right? The underlying technology is blockchain. And what it does is it actually redefines a lot of the paradigms as to how the capital markets in specific have worked. So you might have heard of these ICOs, initial coin offerings, and leaving alone some of the issues with the quality of the offerings. If you look at the underlying technology, and what's really happening is that placement processes are condensed to much faster. As to the exchanges, trading and settlement processes are condensed to much faster. So de facto, let's say what happens is a placement can be global and pretty much immediate, and the consequent processes such as corporate actions can actually all be automated. In the case of the exchanges, what tends to happen is that the trading and the settlement is pretty simultaneous, and there is also no need actually for custody for those who want to do self-custody, for example. So when I mention all these things, they seem pretty basic, but when you need to reconcile that with standing rule books, it's actually very difficult, because standing rule books are made in a world where all these functions are not condensed into one technology. In fact, where they're done separately by separate intermediaries and separate players. So that's what makes this challenging on a public policy front. But inversely, that is the very opportunity of this technology, is that it can make things a lot faster and a lot more automated. And we can come back to that later, but of course, compliance can be coded as well. So that's the real change there. So a lot of people understand aspects of this, but haven't yet understood, I think, quite how impactful it can be on the overall of the processes.
And as it's evolving so quickly, and as you say, it's very early in the stage. So what are the implications then for regulators? Like, how do they keep up with some of the things that the industry is doing?
So different regulators have different approaches, but let's say the commonality between them is, first of all, they seek to understand how it impacts their rule books. So they're a very clear area where it impacts the rule books. Everybody is doing that. Secondly, then there are regulators who conclude really fast that this needs to lead to a new regulatory framework, a wholly new one. So not the securities regulatory framework, but the token regulatory framework. And for example, you can take a look at the news in the last 10 days, but France is making a whole lot of progress actually in that area, with a specific focus on making a new framework for this. And then let's say a third group of regulators are, let's say, it can be combined that they do these different things in parallel, but may try to fit it in the regulatory framework that currently exists with less significant adaptations. And then there is maybe a fourth group that currently does not change its regulations. And to achieve all of this and to decide on which exact position they're going to take, there are again different approaches. Those who are fully independently research driven, then those who have a soft consultation approach with the industry. Being what I mean with that is a dialogue, but not a very broad or let's say not a fully public dialogue. The third kind of groupment I can see is regulators who actually ask the industry to come up with rules to govern yourselves first. And that latter group is really interesting because it means that the industry needs to come up with standards that the regulator can later possibly even adopt. So you might have seen actually from my CV that in the last few months, I've done a lot of work in that third category. So I am de facto an advisory council member of what is called Global Digital Finance. And when you go on the website, which is simply www.gdf.io, you can see some of the code of conduct that we are actually drafting. And these are principles for this new industry with the specific focus on bringing it to a higher level of compliance, because no one obviously benefits from excessive problems. For example, no one benefits from fraud, okay? No one benefits from that, neither the industry or the future industry, and nor do, of course, consumers. So within GDF, we are drafting these codes of conduct. And as said, we have quite extensive conversations with regulators worldwide who are very, very happy and in fact want that open dialogue. So this is different evolutions that I'm seeing. And that's definitely very different from maybe 10 years ago, where the regulators needed to have less direct dialogue with the industry. Now technology, as you know, it moves so fast. You do that in your company all the time. It moves so fast that unless you have a dialogue with the technologists and the technology developers, whether it is those that develop fintech or RegTech or subtech, unless you're talking with them pretty much very frequently, you're going to miss the latest development.
Yeah, I agree with that, absolutely. That's what the MA is doing.
Right.
Has been doing for a little while.
It's fascinating. I mean, there's just so much change going on everywhere, and that ability to keep up and, as you say, either we're staying ahead of the criminals who are also using the technology, or evolving to make sure that everyone can trust in the new instruments and the new processes that exist.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
And my view is all these approaches can work, right? It doesn't matter how the dialogue is actually held, in my view, but the most important is the dialogue. If you don't have that dialogue, it's really hard, I think, to anticipate the next problem. And in my role at the SFC, actually as the FinTech contact point, which we founded there, in 2015, I viewed my key role actually to be talking with people and to understand the next fintech and tech-related development that would affect our sector, or that we could use as a regulator on the data front, as you have amply set out that Arthur is now focused on.
And what about a bit of crystal ball gazing now, and about what are your predictions for the future in terms of risk regulation and compliance? Where do you see things headed?
It's very hard to tell, because my own view is that let's say established players will always remain established players. But for sure, there will be continued pressure on, let's say, control divisions to become more automated, because highly manual processes actually present extremely high operational risk, number one. And number two, they tend to be very expensive. And number three, with the emergence of all these new players, they comparatively are even more expensive. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So the key pressure will continue to be on the very well-established players to become more efficient, including in all their risk processes through the adoption of technology, including vendor technology.
Yes, very good.
Well, I think technology risk is really something that needs to be managed. Cybersecurity, and just keeping ahead of as you say, the criminals, or if not ahead of them, at least, closely behind them. Yeah. We're going to all need to put our wits together.
Absolutely. Connecting, celebrating and championing women in risk regulation and compliance, Risky Women Radio takes an intimate look at the rants and revelations of the top women shaping the debate and the industry. All right, we're going to move on to my favourite part, which is our Risky Women rants and revelations. So this is sort of your advice, your guidance, and some views on things that we could improve and change. So let's start with you, Meena. If you what's that one piece of advice that you would have give to your younger self?
It's not your usual advice, but I really think that in Hong Kong in particular, and in this day and age, it would be a real asset to be able to read and write Chinese. Yeah, and so if somebody was sort of embarking on their career, that's my advice to them. Because really, China is now a superpower. And, even if you look at these listed companies in Hong Kong, there's so many mainland companies that are listed here. And then there's the Belt and Road Initiative and the Greater Bay Area Initiative. If you want to do business with the mainland Chinese, or you want, even in our area, risk and compliance, it really is an asset to have the Chinese language. In the MA, for instance, it's a real asset to have Chinese now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I speak Chinese, but unfortunately I don't read and write it. I wish I had persevered because in 1990 I had started and then I got pregnant, so I stopped.
I wish I even spoke it, so that's at least something. Now, what's your one thing that you could change? If you were the ruler of the world for the day, what one thing would you change?
Ruler of the world. Well, I don't like all of this, patriotism that they're talking about now, and nationalism. I would like to have more sort of like countries working together, back to globalization, not everybody just looking after themselves, China first or America first. I know that, this is unfortunate, but I just hope that this is a passing phase, that, brighter days ahead.
I couldn't agree more. Now, Benedicte, on to you. What's your, advice to your younger self?
I don't know. I look. Maybe the point is go with the flow. So you can't predict everything in your career. So let's say I kind of every single move I've made, I thought I could predict and all of it. And the reality is you can't. And the other thing is, while you move, don't overanalyze, because you won't be able to predict anyway. Until you're in a new environment or a new company, you actually won't be able to predict what the culture is. To the point of culture, actually, even though I do think you can come up with some indicators and internal controls, you actually only know how the people behave until you're in that company. So every single time I've made a move, I've been overthinking it and trying to predict it. So let's say I think economics are fairly easy to predict. I think the drive towards technology, automation, and digitalization, that's all predictable. But what's not predictable is how happy you're going to be in the next career move. So you have to go with the flow, and you have to believe a little bit in fate with that. So let's say, towards my earlier points in this conversation, when I came to Hong Kong, that was like total coincidence, right? I was really actually not looking for a job here, but I was introduced to Goldman, and when they offered me a job after 2 days of interviews and literally the day that I was going to leave, I thought there's an aspect of fate in that. And so I explained that to my parents. I'm not sure they agreed with the fate point, but there you go, I did it. And I would say that the same has been true in nearly every of my moves. You have to go with the flow. If something is calling you, then go for it, and don't think you can predict it. And then the inverse, I was just yesterday actually advising a woman who is actually also 20 years in her career, and who just thinks she is not seen for the qualities that she has in the job. And to be frank with you, having spoken with her and having seen what she can accomplish in her private life in terms of project management, like she started a whole brand on her own, I definitely tend to agree actually in her case that she's not in the right job. So, and by the way, the job is to be, in her case, an executive assistant. So the thing is, she's frustrated in the job. She doesn't, but I guess it's just more simple. An executive assistant job is probably not the right match for somebody who has potential to run your own brand, let's put it like that. So sometimes in life, even though nobody actually likes to move, sometimes if you're not appreciated, or if you think you're not used to your full potential, listen to yourself and don't stay forever in that situation, because you're not doing anybody a favor, neither your employer and certainly not yourself. So those are the two pieces of advice I would have.
And now you are the ruler of the world. What's the thing that you're going to change?
Well, I still think, and everybody who knows me knows my very strong views on ESG, which stands for environmental, social, and governance. And I would say that of these two, I've always said, to me, the E and the S are the ones where most progress has to be made. That is on environmental. I think we are not doing ourselves and our future generations any favors. And I do think that climate change is already a proven fact. I think anybody who's going to wait for further proof of that is already leading the world into excessive risk. And I think that if you've looked at that typhoon that we just witnessed a few weeks ago, and actually I'm just now having the view here on the park and the bird cage. In fact, that lovely bird cage is now closed for 6 months because probably a 500-year-old banyan tree fell on it. And that tree fell over because of that enormous typhoon, which is very much an example of extreme weather that people have long predicted as part of climate change. So if all that remains my let's say, personal pet peeve, I guess you call it. But secondly, another topic that you, Kim, have done an extreme amount of leadership on, and that both you, Kim, and Meena, and I, and all of us feel very strongly about, is the S in ESG, and within it, of course, the topic of anti-slavery. Because when we think about those smaller things, as I just said, of, for example, you're not happy in a job, then change, for example, that is so minor compared to the people who are in a situation of de facto modern slavery. So I am very, very happy that this topic is becoming to the forefront of policymakers' thought process. It's a very difficult topic because obviously not every economy is yet ready to let go of certain aspects of slavery, and some of them will never go. But on the overhaul, to actually raise awareness is very important. So to me, the green journey, which I've advocated for now so many years, I think we're coming to a point where the world leaders are fully focused on it. And we're talking about the world's foremost leaders are focused on it, except for some, though.
Yeah.
I won't name those. But China is very focused, UK is very focused, etc. But for the topic of modern slavery, it's still about 5 years behind in awareness.
Absolutely. So some fabulous advice and guidance there. Thank you very much. Risky Women is a vibrant network at the centre of a global community in a rapidly growing, evolving and influential industry. Given the continued pace of change, our rapid fire round revisits the most pressing topics to share ideas and offer listeners new perspectives. Okay, we will, Benedicte, let's go with you on our Risky Women rapid fire round. What one word can you use to sum up governance, risk and compliance?
I would say always a lot of fun, dealing with new things.
Okay, and your top risk for 2018, or maybe we should be looking at 2019 almost.
I think it's very clear. We're stuck in the middle of a trade war, and it's a very big problem. This exactly what Meena said, this trend of deglobalization. Globalization has, on balance, served the globe very well. And trade wars are a very high overhang over a lot of leading economies.
The cure for the cost of compliance.
The cure for the cost of compliance, very clearly technology. And of all of them, of course, blockchain can eliminate many, many processes in how you do things, as I previously said. And consequently, compliance can also be built in.
Biggest technology impact on compliance and risk?
The biggest, I would say, is blockchain again.
And your outlook for the year ahead, are you optimistic, pessimistic or uncertain?
I'm always an optimist. The only thing is, of course, those trade wars are not good for stock prices in certain markets.
Yes. Okay, Meena, on to you. One word to sum up the world from a governance, risk and compliance perspective.
Evolving.
Nice. Your top risk for 2018 and 19?
Nationalism
Yes.
or populism.
Yes. Cure for the cost of compliance?
Has to be technology.
Biggest technology impact on compliance and risk?
RegTech and FinTech.
And outlook for the year ahead, are you optimistic, pessimistic, or uncertain?
Because of the trade war, pessimistic. If you read the South China Morning Post, the headlines today is the trade war is here to stay.
Yeah.
So I'm pessimistic in the short term, but in the medium and longer term, I'm optimistic. I think if you don't have pain, you don't have gain. So we're just going through in a stage we have to adjust. Like China has to learn how to be more self-sufficient and diversify, etc.
Fantastic. It's been wonderful having you two risky women join me today. Thank you very much. And it's been a delight to speak to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kimberly.
Thank you for listening to this exciting episode of Risky Women Radio to connect, champion, and celebrate women in risk regulation and compliance. I'm Kimberly Cole, based in Hong Kong. For more information on the Risky Women Global Network, head to our website in the episode notes, and please be part of the ongoing conversation by subscribing to this podcast, connecting with us at Risky Women on Twitter, or even reaching out to me directly by email.